Good morning or afternoon, wherever you are, and welcome to this webinar organised by Resilience First. I'm Robert Hall, the Executive Director of Resilience First. For those of you who were unable to view the opening video, Resilience First's mission is to help build resilience across business communities, whether those communities be defined by geography or special interest. I'm delighted to introduce today this session on the important theme of the future of the hospitality sector in a Covid-19 world. As I'm sure you'll be aware, the sector has been a major casualty in the pandemic. According to the industry's trade body, from whom you will hear this morning, about 660,000 jobs have been lost since mid-November last year, which means around a fifth of hospitality sector jobs have disappeared in 2020. Other sources indicate that 9,300 pubs and restaurants have closed for good. After the abandonment of the Christmas and New Year festivities, losses in both people and revenue are set to climb further before the pandemic abates. So what can be done to save the patient above and beyond the vaccines? We have assembled three people who know much about the industry and can give us their view on the rocky path ahead and what intensive care may look like, whether that be through vaccine passports or testing or travel restrictions. To facilitate the session, I'm pleased to welcome Jean Devlin, partner at Control Risks, chair for today's session. In a minute, I will invite Jean to offer some opening remarks by way of scene setting, and she will then introduce our speakers today. Unfortunately, one of our scheduled speakers, Paul Williams from the O2, can't be with us, as he's had a sudden death in the family, so his attention must rightly be elsewhere. And I'm sure you will wish to join me in sending him our sympathies. After the panel discussion, there will be a Q&A, but I encourage all listening to ask questions throughout the session by posting brief questions in the chat box to the right of your screen. And I'm sure the chair will pick up as many as she can in the Q&A session. Jean, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Many thanks, Robert. And hello and welcome everyone to today's discussion. Well, it's been quite a turn of events since the weekend when news started filtering out of planned changes to inbound travel to the UK, and now the prospect of hotels effectively being turned into quarantine facilities. And I can assure you this was not quite what we had in mind on reinventing the hospitality sector when we had our preparation call for this webinar, but it certainly is a timely moment, I think, to be discussing this topic with you all. As Robert mentioned, my name is Jean Devlin. I'm a partner at Control Risks in London, and I'll set the scene for our discussion today before I hand over to our excellent panel of speakers. So let me just introduce our speakers. We have Kate Nichols, the Chief Executive Officer of UK Hospitality, who will be speaking in a few moments, and then we will move to Darren Carter, the Head of Security at Edwardian Hotels London and Chair of the Institute of Hotel Security Management. Each speaker will give their opening statements in turn, and as Robert mentioned, we'll then have a panel discussion before we open up to the Q&A. So please do pose your questions as you're listening throughout the panel. You can use the chat window on the right hand side of your screen, and we will get to those in about 35 minutes or so. Robert, I have a few slides, so if you can get those posted, excellent. Let me get straight into talking about the kind of overview, I guess, for the year ahead and the overall economy. And I think the first point to make is COVID, of course, it hasn't affected all of sectors of the economy and certainly all businesses within those sectors in the same way. And listening to some of the figures that Robert quoted there, the hospitality businesses have been particularly hard hit. As we were in the first wave last April, we had another discussion under the auspices of Resilience First as well, looking at what the kind of longer term impacts would be on the economy. And at that point, we were looking at a kind of managed recession where, you know, there is some bounce back once the kind of immediate devastating effects pass. And we did see that real cliff edge drop in activity last April. The economic activity fell by about a quarter and then recovering over the summer. We haven't seen quite the same extreme declines in economic activity in subsequent lockdowns or during regional lockdowns. But overall, we are looking at a double dip recession with, again, the latest statistics as of November show that the economic activity had fallen again by 8.5%. And in the first quarter of 2021, we are expecting to see a further dip. Although with growth starting to pick up over the spring and kind of regaining across the economy its activities, its previous level of January 2020 towards the end of the year. Another point to make is the UK has been comparatively harder hit than other countries, but we do expect overall the recovery to be robust with about 6% plus growth rates for this year, 2021, and also into 2022, 2023 and beyond. Looking at what it means for hospitality, you know, where social contact and travel are such an integral part of what drives the industry, I want to refer to some of the latest kind of research on just how important social consumption actually is for the UK economy. It accounts for estimates around 20% of UK employment and about 25% of economic activity in normal times. And that has really seen a severe contraction over the course of 2020 and of course into 2021. The biggest hits have been to accommodation. So obviously Darren will be speaking specifically to the hotel sector, as well as recreation and the arts and entertainment. And I know many of you will be focused on those businesses as well. So in terms of when we think about recovery, really the ability to reduce social distancing measures is going to be absolutely crucial to having that kind of impact on employment, but also economic activity in this social consumption part of the economy. Just want to say a particular word on London, as I know that is a focus for many of you. Again, the capital has been badly hit. Estimates range from about 8 to 11% of reduction in the size of the economy over 2020. And again, the labour market data also shows quite significant job losses, around 270,000 jobs. Those have been concentrated in hospitality, about 1 in 3, although normally that only accounts for about 1 in 10 jobs in London. So there is much to be somber about looking at those numbers, but I think it's important for today that we look at the grounds for optimism at this juncture as we consider recovery and reinvention in the sector. There will be 2 real drivers of recovery that are particularly relevant for hospitality in the UK. That is, of course, the continued pace of the vaccination rollout and vaccine supplies holding up over the course of 2021. And hospitality really stands to benefit from that vaccination progressing, as over the course of the year people feel that they can return to social and leisure activities more safely and with increasing confidence. So we do expect to see that coming in over the course of 2021. Related to that, of course, is the return of travel, both domestic and international travel and tourism, and surveys across Europe, including the UK, show that there is a very strong pent-up demand for travel. So initially that is kind of geared towards more domestic travel, propensity to travel domestically, so within the UK, but we expect to see more intra-European travel starting to open up from kind of Q2 onwards over the course of the year, with probably longer haul travel starting to become more commonplace really among countries where we have higher vaccination rates. So obviously the UK as a destination will be quite attractive in that regard, given the strong progress with the vaccination programme. But probably will be reliant on, you know, travel long haul routes from countries with similar progress in their vaccination programs. And just coming to what that timeline looks like, I wanted to sketch out for you as we are looking at the kind of baseline scenario for 2021. We've been doing a lot of monitoring of the pandemic over the course of the last year at this stage. And I just want to pick out a couple of milestones for the UK and for hospitality in particular. So what you're seeing on your screen is our kind of global scenario, baseline scenario for the year. The green chevrons along the timeline represent months, and then above the timeline you have kind of key milestones with regard to vaccination, and below that some of the operational implications. Of course, the UK is way ahead of other European countries in the vaccination rollout, so it looks like the milestone of vaccinating the most vulnerable groups by mid-February will be met. We expect that some lockdown restrictions will be able to be lifted during the spring before Easter, although obviously the government has set a very cautious tone and is taking kind of more precautionary approach with regard to international travel, for example, this time around. So that is a notable difference. Also to note, from about May, we expect that there will be more vaccines that are currently in trial being approved for use, and that will help to ease some of the supply constraints and accelerate rollout. And then we expect from kind of June, July onwards, a more widespread return to office-based working, incrementally kind of rising over the course of the summer, which again is going to be an important driver in London for bringing spending back, where spending has really been very constrained, and household savings rates are at record highs. We do expect to see that coming back into central London with a return to offices around mid-year. And then again, from August and September, we expect to see the vaccination kind of expanding beyond priority groups to the general population, which should enable further reductions in social distancing measures. I think just one last point to make on the return of travel is, I mentioned we do expect kind of leisure travel will be what comes back, and domestic travel coming back more quickly, which obviously is slightly different scenario, especially for hotels, for example, in London. And probably there will be the trends in who is coming, who is spending, are not going to really recover or look similar to what we knew in 2019 for several years. So it will be quite a different trading environment. So with that, I would like to open up to our panel speakers to come to their opening statements. I've just put down a few kind of thoughts, I think, to get yourself thinking for the panel discussion and the Q&A, and I will now invite Kate Nichols to take over. Over to you, Kate.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me here today. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Kate Nichols. I'm Chief Executive at UK Hospitality, which is the trade body for the hospitality sector. We represent businesses and employers. We have 800 member companies. Between them, they operate around about 85,000 outlets. And we cover the breadth of hospitality, so hotels, pubs, bars, restaurants, but also entertainment, late night venues, nightclubs, event and conference venues, casinos, food to go, catering. So a broad range of businesses, as well as those in the tourism infrastructure. And we also have a separate strand of membership, which is suppliers to that, those operators, so that we have a broadly based group that we can then take and be the representative voice to government. And our role really is threefold. It's to promote the reputation of the sector as a great place to grow, work and invest. It's to prevent the imposition of unnecessary restrictions on doing business. And it's to protect the commercial environment within which our members operate and trade. And so over the course of the last year, and we really did start working on COVID on the 21st of January, was my first meeting with government to talk about COVID, the impact on our businesses, and the support we would be needed to get through that. We started working on that 21st of January, as I say. We've spent most of this year ensuring that we've got a strong voice into government, into local authorities, into the key stakeholders, to make sure that we have the best trading environment that we can open as safely as we can. And we were instrumental in developing the COVID secure protocols for reopening, and then to make sure that the support is there. So I'm going to start by just going through, looking at the situation that we're at. what impact we've seen of COVID throughout the course of the last year, and then spend most of my time talking about our plans and our 3-point plan for going forward with government to look ahead to 2021. But I did want to start with the positives and just a reiteration of the importance culturally, socially and economically of the hospitality sector, because I do think we need to hold on to that at this point when we are probably at the lowest point of the whole of last year. I don't think it's been as bleak as it possibly is now, sort of starting the year at our lowest ebb. But I do want to start with the positive note that we ended 2019 on, because that looks ahead to where we can look to get towards again with the right level of support, with the right financial support and the right policies in place, which frames the whole of our discussion. So when we come to look at 2019 and the start of 2020 and that sort of optimistic period that we started with the Prime Minister saying it was going to be the best year yet, hospitality started in a very good place. £130 billion industry, £39 billion of that is foreign tourist spend in our premises as they come over. So tourism, our third largest export earner, and 11% of employment, 7% of GDP. So 130 billion. And the reason I'm spending time going over this is that this was the important point that we lodged with government at the start of the year, which has stood us in good stead in continuing to have that dialogue about reopening, support, survivability and the future. 130 billion means we're bigger than automotive, aerospace and pharmaceuticals put together. And as I say, third largest export earner. Foreign tourists spend more on eating and drinking out in the UK than all of our food and drink exports put together. 3.2 million people employed in the sector and almost 2 million more in the supply chain, and a £40 billion tax contribution to the UK exchequer funding vital public services. To put that in context, that is roughly the entire social care budget of the UK that we generate each and every year, £1 in every 3 going back to the exchequer in some form of tax. And crucially, when it comes to that employment number, 60% of those are 18 to 24-year-olds. And we've continued to generate in the decade since the financial crash, 1 in 6 of net new jobs. So a tax generator, an economic engine, and a jobs generator. And I think that was what we crucially got into the number 10 and number 11's minds as we went into this crisis in the first quarter of 2020. Now, sadly, those numbers obviously are not reflective of where we have ended up at the end of 2020. Foreign export earning almost entirely eliminated. The overall contribution, that sort of revenue down more than 50% year on year, single biggest drop, single biggest hit in the other industrial sectors, and our employment numbers sadly down almost 30% in terms of total headcount. Our headcount shrank by 4% both in November and December, and for those who were remaining in employment, 63% fewer hours scheduled. So a real hit on employment, protected by furlough, but the big question is for how much longer? Because 1 in 5 of our businesses at the end of 2020 said they had enough cash reserves to get them through towards March. So a really bleak situation that we've been presenting to the Treasury, with a £500 million cash burn net of all government support, and hospitality has had a lot of government support, but net of government support, the industry is burning through £500 million a month in remaining closed. And even the biggest companies in our sector are running out of cash by the time we get to March. So we want to sort of have that communication with the government about starting the year at the lowest ebb. How do we build back better, and how do we help the economy recover more quickly? So we need to retain that impression of that positive contribution that we make and can go back towards making, and also hold on to the positives of the summer. When we restarted hospitality, we did see growth, and we did see growth in GDP. Anemic, but we were the only ones generating most of that growth. If you look at August's GDP figures, it's about 2.8% growth as that recovery started to kick in, and it was accelerating and ticking upwards. Almost all of that was generated by eating and drinking out in high street hospitality and the domestic staycation boom that we saw over the course of July and August. Sadly, 2 months of growth doesn't compensate for 10 months of closure and severe restrictions, and the restrictions that we opened with do impact on profitability and viability. But it did show the opportunity, and it has showed government that with the right support, we can get back to that, we can recover, and we can help the economy to recover more quickly. And nobody is faster than hospitality in doing that bouncing back if we've got the right support and the restrictions removed, and in generating those jobs. And we demonstrated we did it after the financial crash. So if you lift restrictions one day, customer demand starts to return on the second, and on the third day, we need to put somebody into employment to deliver against that. So our 3-point plan for communicating back to government, helping with that Build Back Better message and the appetite that the government has for returning to rapid recovery, and that's what they keep emphasising. Pace of recovery, growth and investment spread across all regions of the UK, delivering the levelling up agenda in terms of skills, training, investment and infrastructure. The fastest way to do that is by backing hospitality. So our 3-point plan that we've taken to government: a clear staged exit strategy linked to the vaccine rollout. If you've protected the most vulnerable, and the vaccine rollout that they're looking at for the top 4 cohorts takes account of 88% of deaths, when you expand it to the over 50s, which is the ambition by the end of March, you are accounting for 98% of all cases, all deaths, and all hospitalizations. So there is no reason why you cannot then restart the economy. And looking at back to the safe COVID secure protocols that the industry developed in July last year for reopening in July. We are the sort of not only the representative body in the UK, but we also work across Europe, and we have global members. So we drew on best practice from across the globe and the best scientific evidence to put in place really comprehensive protocols for reopening. There are about 70 to 80 pages of regulation that look at how you do a risk assessment in hospitality, entertainment, and leisure businesses, the mitigation measures to be put in place to deal with the risks associated with virus transmission, hygiene, sanitation, social distancing, ventilation, to be able to ensure that hospitality is safe. We were safe to reopen in July. We were safe to have our hotels open prior to that, catering for homeless, NHS frontline workers, and actually taking COVID patients once they've come off high dependency into a sort of more care environment. So our hotels, we know, are incredibly safe environments, and we reopened those hotels for that purpose at the height of the pandemic last time. No cases of COVID amongst the staff, no cases of COVID amongst the people who are living there. Reopened hospitality more broadly, July to August, 60 million customer visits a week over that period. Very low levels of infection, 1% or less than 1% in our teams, and less than 3% of cases during that period attributable to hospitality. So our COVID secure protocols will ensure that we can open in a sustainable manner, we can build resilience, we can get open as quickly as possible and get back to generating that growth. Now, we know from the vaccine rollout that the 15th of February is a key date for the government to come back and report to us on progress. We're asking for that to be mirrored by a clear, staged exit strategy, not only from lockdown, but from the restrictions, because those COVID secure protocols are effective, but they do inhibit occupancy, capacity, and therefore profitability. The best we were able to achieve over the summer was 2 weeks, where the sector reported that they were operating at break even. So clearly that's not a sustainable model for the long term, but it would be feasible to reopen safely with those restrictions in place, and then look to a 12 to 14 week strategy for reducing those social distancing restrictions as the vaccine rates take effect. The reason 12 to 14 weeks, because the targets that they're setting for the 15th of February for the over 70s, the end of March for the over 50s, are first jab only, and it's 12 weeks before people get their second jab, and it's a further 2 weeks after that before you get immunity. But you need that phasing of restrictions. Equally, as we just touched on, the idea of quarantine hotels, again, we need a phased, clear exit strategy from those kind of restrictions to make sure it doesn't deter foreign visitors. In the short term, it works because it reassures people that the UK is a safe, controlled country of destination, and our venues within it are safe and can operate safely to make sure that people can return. But longer term, it's not sustainable to keep that in. Second point in relation to that clear staged exit strategy, we've talked about the vaccine. Actually, I think the reopening mechanism and trigger will be rapid mass testing. So we know that, you know, for a proportion of our workforce, for a large proportion of our customer base, particularly those working in the late night entertainment sectors, the customer base is going to be younger. It is going to be a considerable period of time before those people get their vaccinations. And actually, for a large proportion of the younger age group, there are concerns about vaccines in relation to fertility and the time the vaccination, if you are trying for a family or have just recently had a baby, that will take out a significant proportion of that group. So rapid mass testing, I think, will accelerate and act as an enabler for reopening those parts of the economy that we all want to get back to: concerts, mass events, conferences, banqueting, dinners, those kind of areas that are harder to open. Mass testing does that. So we're piloting with the Department of Health, mass testing in for the workforce on a weekly basis, daily contact tracing if there are problems with people who've got cases or test positive, and having a sort of clarity that you can take a rapid test, you can demonstrate that you are negative. Both helps in returning to work and eliminating the quarantine and self-isolation requirements, but also helps to reopen parts of the economy. Second big point, we need to rebuild balance sheets and tackle the indebtedness of the entire sector. We know that it is going to be difficult to reopen all of the sector. As Robert said, the latest figures were that 10,000 premises have closed for good. The forecast is that that could be as big as a third. So we are going to see a contraction in the sector. Those who do emerge blinking from the smouldering ruins of their previously well-resourced, resilient businesses, and that is going to be a large proportion of even the big names in the sector, are going to need to rebuild their balance sheets in order to be able to reopen and to reopen successfully and to quickly get back into recovery mode. So if the government wants hospitality to be the engine of economic growth, it can be, and generate the jobs and growth. If they want the recovery to be speedy, as they say, then we need to make sure that we've got the mechanisms in place to support those businesses. The quickest way of rebuilding balance sheets and helping them is to extend the lower rate of VAT that the Chancellor introduced for hospitality and tourism businesses to stimulate consumer demand, and to avoid imposing additional costs and improving productivity, extend the business rates holiday. We need those for at least a year, and we'll particularly need them in London, which has been so hardly hit, if we're going to get that rebuild quickly. There's other mechanisms in the budget that we would look for about flexible furlough, protecting cash in the businesses in terms of rent and rent debt, but also loans. But those two measures are essential. And then looking ahead to the future recovery, we are going to be in a period where it takes a long time to recover to pre-COVID levels of revenue, and even longer to look at for recovery of profit. If you look back to the major shocks we had with the financial crash, 9/11, that impacted international travel, it takes as long to rebuild profitability as it does to rebuild revenues. And so we need to make sure that we've got the right regulatory and fiscal environment. So we need a longer term reform of business rates. We need to look at the business taxation system, and we need to tackle those structural reforms that have been sitting around for too long. Landlord and Tenant Act, planning, licensing, the structural reform of business rates, and also then looking at the sort of vocational training qualifications and upskilling that we looked at in terms of the tourism sector deal. And if we do all of that, then I confidently believe, going back to what I said at the start of my observations, that we will go back to being 11% of employment, 7% of GDP, 1 in 6 of net new jobs, and a high tax contribution. And crucially, we will be at full strength to present Britain on the global stage when we host the G7, COP26, and participate in the government's ambition of establishing a new D20. So if you want to come back in full strength, you need hospitality to be at full strength, and you need to support us. And as the Prime Minister said on a recent business call that I was on with him, you know, London as a capital, if we particularly look at London in this sense, in terms of building resilience and rebuilding London's place in the world, it rests on its world-class restaurants, its world-class bars, its hotels, its nightclubs, its social life. Our cultural capital is so invested in hospitality, as well as our economic capital. So that's why we believe it's important to make sure that hospitality is at full strength, and we will look forward to working with the government to deliver that. Thank you.
Kate, thank you so much for such a compelling plan, and it's great to hear the ambition as well in how you've presented that. So I'm really looking forward to coming back to you with some questions. But I want to bring Darren in now, who's also going to give us his statement, and then we'll move into questions.
Thank you, Jean, and thank you, Robert, and being in the team for the invitation. And I have to start by saying that I'm very much in the Kate Nichols space of optimism, actually, rather than something else. But just a caveat of today. So I come with two hats today. So both from an Edwardian perspective and that of IHSM. So my commentary and observations, of course, are not necessarily those of either of those two organisations. So just to package that away. But I think we are fast approaching, actually 1 year ago, that Edwardian hosted a Resilience First cyber strategy talk at the Mayfair, and I still have vivid memories back then of seeing our guests for that meeting arrive, approaching one another with somewhat nervously, not knowing what to do with their hands, elbows, or bodies. And I recall, along with Bina, taking guidance from Public Health England at the time. And of course, this was very early on, and the advice was, as long as we have lots of hand sanitizer, everything should be fine. So, you know, wow, what little did we know what was about to unfold on us. But so that was extraordinarily almost 1 year ago today. Something else I wanted to start by recognising is the work of those right across our hospitality sector, actually, who, despite a multitude of extreme stresses on themselves and their businesses, have continued to support frontline NHS, emergency services, other key workers and their local communities, and continue to do so today, actually. So, and there are many, many examples of those businesses that still continue to do that. So until now, very few people have given much thought, in my view, or considered their safety or security when planning holidays, a weekend trip, or just simply enjoying an evening out. And this is despite many apparently indiscriminate acts of terrorism, an increased frequency in recent years, extreme weather events, violent crime, and so on. And I guess we all have that inner capacity to just soldier on, whatever will be type attitude. And it's not by chance that we are conditioned this way. It isn't that people are just reckless. In reality, there exists an expectation that I will be taken care of, I will be safe and kept from harm when I do visit a hospitality venue, be that a local pub, a restaurant, a concert venue, theatre, or indeed, in my arena, within hotels. And this is what we have come to expect as the norm. Hospitality professionals are highly skilled at making people feel safe. Our venues are seen as places of refuge and sanctuary, a place of good order and control, and particularly in times of stress or urgency. And this is also what makes us, as consumers of hospitality, most vulnerable, actually. So when people enter our spaces, we are solely focused on ensuring that they relax and enjoy the time spent with us. We are effectively, by nature of doing that, encouraging people to drop their guard in a sense, and albeit this is most often a subconscious self-awareness. But this is why when something sudden or unexpected does happen in a hospitality setting, it comes as a shock to the system, to those affected. And by that I mean the type of newsreel that we often see, where you have a commentator of a village that often will claim this just doesn't happen in these parts, not in our village. This is just not normal for us. And this is why people often have this type of reaction. Of course, now we must consider how the past year or so may have altered behaviours. Are people likely to have changed? And I think it's safe to say that we understand that they have. Are we now much more considerate about where we are going, how we travel there, who will be there when we get there, and in what numbers? Will we continue to travel and socialise as we did in 2019? So I read recently about the rise of the conscious traveller, which is a surge, and as we've seen in periods of relaxation of restrictions of staycations or passport-free holidays post-pandemic. So this experience has most certainly created a much more discerning traveller, those that seek familiarity and reassurance and confidence, and more so than ever that they are in a place of safety. So this pandemic has materially changed the aspirations and behaviours the world over. I think we will see the leisure traveller as someone who is far more willing now to invest time in their own personal risk assessment than before. As has been mentioned by Kate, rightly so, international business travel is likely not to make a grand return in 2021, with domestic business travel still heavily restrained also. But there does remain, though, a great desire for both leisure and business travel, this pent-up demand. We've seen this in surge periods as restrictions have been lifted throughout the past year. Not all businesses are willing to, or capable, in fact, to sit it out on Zoom or Teams. Other platforms are available, of course. It is evident that whilst remote working offers an alternative, I don't see this as being a long-term progressive solution for many. And people do need social interaction at work, as well as with friends, family, and new communities, and to see a live band or a show, for example. So if this is the case, and I accept there will be other views, do we need to change anything? How are we appealing to the needs of the conscious traveller, and what is it going to take to restore confidence? What is it that people will be looking for in how we operate, and what will make people feel safe? Well, we know a little more than we did at least a year ago. A pandemic most probably made an appearance on most risk registers across all business sectors, but was it ever really planned for? Were we really prepared? I think it is fair to say the vast majority of the world was not. The vaccine programme will, of course, provide us with a roadway to normalcy. And with any roadway, we will still remain with rules, and there will be new and permanent norms about how we manage safely, whether it is hygiene, food preparation, service delivery, sequencing and management of people, of crowds, and of spaces. 2021, of course, will also be a defining year, which we will see the arrival of newly introduced standards with regards to travel risk management, particularly with our corporate travellers, and of course, new responsibilities for business operators of public spaces under the Protect duty as well. So there's a whole combination of things that will change the way we operate our businesses. But these are good news items for businesses, in fact, in terms of making places of safety, as well as for those of us that like to travel and enjoy life. You know, we have never stopped making people feel safe. We have seen the devastating impact on our industry. Some 6,000 less licensed premises, in fact, exist now than they did in 2019. And the ever-increasing number of those sadly losing their livelihoods. I do believe, as I've mentioned, that there will be a time of opportunity and restoration. It will take time, but we do have some room for optimism right now, despite as difficult as it is to look beyond the severe and painful stage that we are currently experiencing. So I think I'll just leave those thoughts there for now, and I will hand back to Jean, if I may.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Darren. I want to put a question to each of you in turn. So my question is, obviously we've both sketched out some really good kind of positive ways that we can look forward and what it's going to take for us to get there. But I want to ask each of you, perhaps Kate from the perspective of the sector, and then Darren maybe from the perspective of running a business. What do you think the biggest challenge is going to be? What do you see as the biggest hurdle, Kate, in that 3-point plan? You know, really reaching the seeing the sector kind of recover to 2019 levels, regardless of how that looks or how that's spread or the type of businesses that have closed or opened. But what are the challenges?
I think that big challenge and the biggest challenge we face is a very immediate one. There are lots of other things that become problems and become challenges later on, but there's an immediate one about survivability. How quickly can we get open, and does the cash run out, or does the support run out before we can do that? And that is the challenge that we're grappling with in that period, mid-February to end of March. You know, how quickly can you get open? Because that seems to me the single fundamental one. Everything else flows from that, but if you can't survive, then you don't have a recovery, and everything else is moot.
Great. Okay, very clear. Darren, from your perspective, in the hotel sector, what do you see the biggest challenge in recovering, regardless of how that looks?
I think, I guess along similar lines, we've seen it in smaller segments, I guess, but in the short term, I think powering up the machine for a lot of businesses is is certainly where we're focused, and peers of mine, because this would require a huge investment of time and money in preparing large numbers of people who actually in many respects have adopted a very different way of life over the past year. For the most part, quite literally, skills have been lost. Returning to work will no doubt cause, an element of disruption to what is now their new normal home life. And of course, we have many array of persistent threats aside from COVID that still exist from a risk perspective. We must reacclimatize people with, elements of petty crime, terrorism, violence, and conflict, and so all these things, they don't just naturally reappear. These whilst they are naturally embedded within what we do in our normal way of life, that was kind of approaching a year ago that people were wholly engaged in this work life. So so acclimatizing people and sort of rebuilding your business or powering the machine back up, I think is going to be a challenge. And of course, for our commercial teams, continue to work much harder than they did before to gain market share, and so there's that element of our industry as well, which was already a fiercely competitive environment. So yeah, some quite immediate challenges, I think.
And my next question is again to both of you, thinking about what you've sketched out in terms of what the future actually looks like. So assuming that we do kind of meet that survival challenge, and the businesses that make it through, and I appreciate just getting demand back, getting footfall back is going to be so crucial. But assuming that we kind of meet that challenge this year, maybe by the first half of the year, what do you think that new normal is going to look like? Darren, you mentioned, the kind of rise of the conscious traveller, different type of clientele potentially. Kate, what do you think this sector is going to look like for the UK in the years to come?
Well, I don't think the fundamentals change, because I think that what customers are looking for hasn't changed fundamentally throughout this pandemic. We've seen a focus from consumers when businesses have been able to open, a greater sort of rating about safety, security, cleanliness, those kind of hygiene factors, where you would normally see those come lower down the consumer feedback sense, where they look primarily for quality, offering the service. Those kind of experiential side normally rates more highly. During the pandemic, we saw the hygiene factors come right the way up to the top, but I think that will dissipate over time as it becomes more normal. And I'm trying to make sure that we don't have a new normal, because the businesses, if you look at pubs and casual dining restaurants, more so than the hotel side, but those COVID secure protocols fundamentally change the business model. You're not profitable, so we can't afford to have them becoming the new norm. And I do think we need to move away from those. Yes, we can stand them back up if a pandemic emerges again. But while we are in the endemic stage of this virus, which hopefully we will move into in the second half of the year, then we need to be moving away from those restrictions. So I think what customers will be looking for longer term is experience and quality of experience. And yes, they may be traveling less, or they may be coming to fewer business meetings, or they may be coming to fewer conferences, or they may be coming back into the office on fewer days. But when they do, they are going to want that quality of experience, and they are going to want that safe social space in order to meet. And I think the UK businesses are very well equipped to capitalise on that international demand, because, if you're thinking about your College of Cardiac Surgeons and the international conference that we normally host in London, if you're going to come to one of those 3-day conferences, where do you want to come? Is it a destination that has a lot of other attractions around it so that you make the most of that visit? Or do you really want to go to a, sort of a car park outside of Hamburg? No disrespect to Hamburg at all, but those are the kind of conferences that a lot of people will decide to go virtually. Because what I see as the future is a lot of blend and a hybridization. So I think you will use the technology and the platforms we've got for people to do face-to-face attendance at conferences, and for some people to attend virtually. And I think people will have a lot of discretion. Equally, I think the model of 9 to 5, 5 days a week, commuting into the office, has changed fundamentally, but I don't think it's going to mean that everybody's working from home. I think you will see people in the offices and you'll see it spread out. So our businesses need to pivot to look at new customers rather than changing the fundamentals of who they are. And I was taken by what Darren was saying about, you know, hotels that are normally associated with business may well need to pivot to be able to offer leisure. Equally, pret-a-manger and those kind of food to go that are set up in city centres for a commuter population will need to do more to work with their residential population.
That's great. Thank you, Kate. Darren, did you want to comment on that? And perhaps I could ask you specifically on that point about COVID secure practices. We have had a question on, you know, how, I guess, durable some of those might be in terms of certain customers, you know, still wanting to have that kind of stronger emphasis on hygiene to feel safe. Do you see this being kind of an aspect that will, you know, help to drive how certain brands, you know, articulate their value, articulate their proposition, and, you know, more widely, could we see that, you know, being there as a kind of resilient strategy for businesses and how they operate in future to be able to kind of turn the button when, you know, when it's going into winter season or flu season? Do you see that emerging, and or how do you see the kind of falling away of those practices happening?
Yeah, okay, so I think I made a reference to we've never stopped being safe places, actually, and that's so what for the uninformed don't understand that most practices within responsible businesses, certainly within hospitality, are almost kind of COVID compliant already. Okay, they're operating at such a level where we are working within the realms of, you know, norovirus type you know, risks. So the levels of hygiene, whilst yes they were adapted and potentially and they were enhanced, they are already at such a degree in terms of infection control, it almost kind of meets the standard. But almost from the outset last year, not just in the UK but around the world, companies did align themselves to independent verification and validation of programs, and that will be sustained, and that will continue. There will be, you know, undoubtedly more scrutiny and compliance, but this is not something which we are alien to within all spectrum of, you know, hospitality. And I think, as Kate mentioned as well, some things will not change actually in terms of. I read a McKinsey report, one of the many that we all read recently, and it said that, you know, customers will still crave experiences. You know, with or without a mask, the industry will still be expected to deliver unforgettable experiences, and people will still crave them. Yes, we may deliver that in a slightly different way and have had enhanced certain ways that we do things, but that's naturally what we would adapt to. We're actually quite, if I say so myself, quite a resilient and adaptable, quite an agile industry actually, because we meet the changing demands and needs of people on a daily basis, and you know, compliance and levels of hygiene are something which for the vast majority of our industry comes naturally.
That is a really great point, and I think that's come across really clearly. You both see that enduring customer needs, being able to be nimble, but also remember, you know, what those are. That's really at the heart of a successful business. We've got a really good question here, and Kate, I'm going to throw it to you, which is about when do you expect mass participation events, concerts, you know, theatres, festivals. You know, Glastonbury's been cancelled for the second year in a row. When do you think that will be an option? Will we have Glastonbury 2022?
No, I would be hopeful that we would be able to restart elements of that second half of this year. I think the key challenge here is the government doesn't feel able to give commitments on timetables, and those type of mass participation events require a long lead time. So, you know, if you are planning to make big investments in Southampton Boat Show, you know, Edinburgh Festival, those kind of big events, you need to know well in advance to be able to plan. And at the moment, we don't have line of sight beyond the 31st of March. And this is the thing that is hampering businesses large and small. As I say, I do think for those mass participation events, lateral flow testing, rapid mass testing, requirements to have people do a test to prove that they are negative before they go to test in the queue, all those kind of things. That will be a key enabler to open up those parts of the economy, because we can't wait for a vaccine. The other element that we do need government to address as a matter of urgency, the reason that Glastonbury was cancelled this year is partly to do with that, but it's also the fact that you can't get insurance. You can't get insurance for these mass events. You can't get it for conferences. Insurers are not willing to put in place pandemic insurance anymore, or if they do, the premiums are sky high. So we are in a situation that the industry faced, particularly around terrorism and acts of terrorism, where you had an inability to get insurance and you need a government solution to step in as insurer of last resort. If the government could work on that, that would really help for those kind of events to reopen, because the problem is we've had too many times where the government says you can and then very last minute it's cancelled. So if you think about Southampton Boat Show, again, was cancelled sort of, you know, the weekend before because restrictions were changed. London theatres reopened 2nd of December only to be closed on the 16th. You can't afford to do that and take the risk.
Great. That is really clear. I have a question now. There's some really excellent questions in the chat. I want to bring back to the focus on London. So we have a question about Kate, for I think for you, around the leveling up agenda, and I guess for the sector overall, where that fits in. You know, clearly you see that as really key to building back better, to, you know, driving employment, especially in those, you know, kind of lower age brackets. How could you just expand on where you see the kind of leveling up agenda, hospitality's role within there, and then what do you think should be put forward at COP26 in terms of hospitality's role within the UK? What do you want to project at that?
Gosh, there's a lot to unpack in that one. I think the levelling up agenda creates real problems for London, because the government's levelling up agenda and Build Back Better is all about how you spread jobs, growth and investment more equally across all parts of the country, and how do you get some quick wins. So this is a government that is sort of 1.5, 2 years into a 4 to 5 year term of office before they get Brexit and COVID behind them. And they need to be able to demonstrate to those red wall seats in the north, the Bishop Aucklands, the red cars, those kind of areas, that there's been a real material difference to people's lives. And waiting for a Trans-Pennine Railway or a road upgrade is a very long term. So they want quick wins. And one of the things that will impact there is what happens on the high street in those town and city centres. If you've got boarded up places, if you've got high unemployment, that's going to be a challenge. Hospitality is one of the few industries that goes in and has a reach into all of those places. So the government's agenda is around levelling up there, which we can clearly help with if we've got the right ability in the toolkit to do it. Last year, we invested £10 billion in the high street, rolling out concept opening, and hotels and entertainment and leisure are a key part of that. We can't do it if we're so heavily indebted and we don't have the support on rates and VAT. So we can do that there. We can do it in coastal communities, and create the employment. The second problem, though, is that levelling up usually means spending money outside of London. And crucially, this is going to be a very different recession to any we've had before, in that London is not going to be immune from this. And actually, London is in a far worse situation because that triple whammy of no officers, no commuters, no international tourists. 70% of spend in our hospitality venues in London is international tourists, and no cultural activity. So you've got London in a far worse situation. So you've got that tension in the Treasury between needing to invest and reinvigorate London, otherwise the economy doesn't recover, and London will be a drag, versus we must invest and spend in the regions. So we need to be able to explain to them how supporting London hospitality to recover will actually generate jobs and growth in those regions. The volume of spend that comes in through London, foreign tourists, before they go out elsewhere is key. So I think it's about explaining how we need London to be profitable to get everybody back in full strength, and that's a sort of international bit. And then it's the sort of COP26 and also the G7. G7 being hosted in Cornwall is part of the levelling up agenda. We tend to think of levelling up as being the northeast, but actually it's just as much about the deprived regions of the southwest, which are economically very deprived. So G7 in Cornwall, COP26 in Glasgow. It's a literal showcase. You cannot have those two events happening if you haven't got hospitality open with the right restrictions in place and the right controls in place, and have got them profitable. So you know, we have a literal showcase to show the world what we can do, to demonstrate how important we are to the economy. And I think it is a sense of the government backing us. And also COP26, again, it's about the opportunity we have in hospitality to make small incremental changes in a lot of businesses to deliver a real step change in the government's ambition to carbon net zero. So that's what that is about, you know, showing that we're green, showing that we're in line with the government's ambitions and agenda for the country, for the economy, is a virtuous circle that then comes back to, and if you want that, you need to support us now, you need to give us the additional funding that we're asking for, the additional support, and then we'll do even more of it.
Great, thanks, Kate. A difficult question, but I have to say it was a fantastic answer. I want to ask Darren, come to you to ask about what you see as the kind of future, the hybrid future for the hotel and kind of leisure sector. So perhaps in your capacity as chairing the Hotel Security Institute, do you see this? Do you see there being a hybrid future for hotels in terms of their businesses? You know, for example, perhaps reopening, but with restaurants not open, aside from customers, or other changes that you foresee over the course of this year?
So yeah, I think if the industry, if we have learned anything from this past year, it's that we have probably found and reached into areas that we felt we never would before, in terms of how we've had to remodel, adapt to certain levels of restriction, a change in dynamic of or demographic of customer, what their needs are. And I think inherently that's historic within our business anyway. But yeah, I mean, as has been alluded to, the dynamics of how business arrives at our doorstep will change. Certainly with the strength of domestic business being the focus certainly for this year, that's a given. And businesses in hotels are highly adaptable, and I think have a lot of focus with meeting in a very specific needs of very small groups of people. But where we begin to look at hybrid modelling about how we're using our space and the people that it serves, I mean, yes, there will be people or organisations that are more reluctant to change, actually, that are probably steeped in ways of working. But I would say by and large, there is a realisation and an understanding and an acceptance that there will be, in order for you to succeed at any level, you have to introduce these levels of adaptability and look at different ways. And we saw this, for example, with supply chains. With inevitably, I don't think there was any industry untouched by the realisation of weaknesses or strengths within their supply chains, and we've seen that as well. And we've had complete reorganisation about how we deliver an operation through this pandemic. So I think there has been some great learning from this year, despite the extreme stresses, as I mentioned. There is a lot of positive to take forward in terms of how we adapt and can face the near and long-term future.
Excellent. Thank you. I think we will need to draw the questions to a close there. Sorry, there's a few that we couldn't answer, but we will pick those up and follow up with those who couldn't get an answer. I just want to thank both of you, Kate and Darren, for some really excellent points today. I think it's been very clear that while it's been a horrendous year for the sector, actually there's that 3-point plan around vaccination, mass testing, restructuring the balance sheet, surviving this period is very clear, very ambitious. And Darren, as you said, the kind of new normal of still puts the customer first. So, reinvention is really kind of focusing on the strengths of the existing business model. I think that point came out really well. And then clearly the kind of policy support that is going to be needed to drive the recovery around hospitality is going to be really critical, that we see clear plans around that this year with that levelling up agenda in mind. I will finish there, Robert, and hand back over to you.
Thank you. Well, it's been truly a fascinating and very informative hour. I've enjoyed it very much, and you've all covered a lot of ground in your time, very short time. Thank you. So on behalf of Resilience First and all the people who've listened, I'd like to thank the chair, particularly, and also the speakers for their superb contributions today. We will be circulating a short summary in due course and a recording of this session. So all it says for me really is to say, please join us for our next webinar, which is on the 8th of February, when we'll be looking at the concept of agile resilience and the launch of a guide which has been prepared in conjunction with McKinsey & Company. So thank you for your time. Have a good week, and goodbye.